Hey there, all you freaking nerds. It's Swank Ivy again with another Letters to an Asexual, and this is number 135. So today I want to talk to you about why people have such a negative reaction to asexuality. This is a pretty similar topic to things that I have covered in many other videos, but what's interesting is I am bouncing off of a comment that someone left in my inbox in this video today. And I'm elaborating a little bit about comparisons between negative reactions to asexuality and vegetarianism. So you have to wait a little bit for the analogy to kick in. But, whoops, I just dropped my glasses. I need those. So I'm going to go ahead and start with reading an anonymous person's message to me that was sent on Tumblr, and then I'll just go through all the comments. So, an anonymous person asked me, "Hey, I love your YouTubes. It gave me a lot of comfort, though I was kind of taken aback by people throwing such negative comments about asexuality. Why do those people take offense at the idea that there are people who are not attracted to others in a sexual way? Anyway, thanks for your work." Here's what I said to them. "You're great, thank you. It is weird how so many people hate on asexuality, especially since the other half of the people who criticize my activism are always saying that I have no reason to be an activist since no one cares. It's kind of amusing, I guess, when people are shouting abuse in one of my ears and whispering gaslighting-style denial of that abuse in the other. I think part of what motivates anti-asexual attitudes and acephobia is an automatic defensiveness that comes with valuing something and finding out someone else doesn't value that thing. We've been taught as a society that sex is very important, and that we shouldn't be ashamed of desiring it, though it's also considered dirty and shameful by a good chunk of the population, especially if you have a lot of sex, have sex outside of certain circumstances, or have the wrong kind of sex. So there's this love-hate relationship with sex throughout our culture, and part of what makes the contradictory, sometimes shameful messages more bearable is that everyone else you know is probably struggling with it too, or had to at one point. When people find out asexuality exists, sometimes they think it's an automatic attack on them, or a statement of elitism. How dare you say you don't desire this? It's basic. It's important to me. It's part of what makes me a human. You're not enough like me to treat with respect if you don't want it. So I'm either going to shame you or deny that you feel that way at all." I've seen too many people react to mentions of asexuality with adamant glorification of their sexuality to believe this reaction isn't motivated somewhat by some non-asexual people's insecurity with their own sexuality. But just like same-sex marriage doesn't pollute the integrity of different-sex marriage, asexual people don't represent an attack on people who aren't asexual. It's just how some people interpret it when they view us with a lens that presents us as if our sexuality is commentary on theirs. So someone else came in and weighed in on this, and they elaborated on, their thoughts on what I had just said, and this is their comment. "Do you think there's also an element of morality and people perceiving asexual people as judgmental? Like you say, sex is often seen as dirty, especially when people have lots of it. For an example, vegetarians. I'm not talking the pushy, stereotypical kind, just your regular, nice vegetarian who doesn't judge people for eating meat. But people still act like jerks to this vegetarian because they think the vegetarian is judging them, whether or not that's true. I think there is also an element of guilt. Lots of people feel ashamed for having sex outside of marriage, or for having lots of sex, or certain kinds of sex. I think they see asexuals, along with celibate people, as a challenge for what they see as their own flaws, and they get defensive. Did what I say make any sense?" Here's my response to that. Yes, that's exactly it for some people. That's why I mentioned that they sometimes get defensive and perceive us to be elitist, even if we aren't. Though I'm not going to deny that sometimes you do see this in the asexual community. There are certainly judgmental jerks everywhere, and some of the sex-judgmental attitudes and damaging purity narratives that we see in the larger world do occasionally come from asexual people. some of whom may be employing those as a misguided form of pride against a society that has told them there's something wrong with them for not desiring sex if they don't. As an asexual vegetarian, I've definitely noticed parallels between people's reactions to those things. People who abstain from sex and abstain from meat are often misinterpreted as having great self-control or being more pure or demonstrating an admirable resistance to temptation, even if they have no urges to have sex or eat meat. It is not uncommon for people to react to my asexuality or my vegetarianism with either a glorification of their own identity/choice, but sex is the best feeling in the world, but bacon is so delicious, or an immediate defensive statement that implies our identity or choice constitutes an attack on theirs. Don't have sex, huh? So, you think you're really pure and righteous then? / don't eat meat, huh? So, you think you're better than me? Both reactions obviously constitute misinterpretations of what our identities and choices mean to us, and suggest a good deal of projection on their part. But while I think it's appropriate to explain our lack of judging them in in-depth discussions, I'm not going to start incorporating automatic reassurances of their identities or eating choices into my initial declaration of my labels. By that I mean I'm not going to say, I'm asexual, but that doesn't mean I hate people who have sex. Or, I'm vegetarian, but I'm not going to comment on your eating choices. As an automatic addendum to my identity/food choice disclosure, people really need to stop assuming that other people's labels are first and foremost about commenting on theirs. And stop making that the central discussion point when we want to discuss ours. TLDR, yes, there are lots of parallels between asexuality and vegetarianism in that people assume we're judgmental, but they really need to learn that our identities and choices are about ourselves, not a means to shame them. And I had a whole separate post about asexual vegetarians because I had noticed this comparison being eerily similar with the way that people talk about both of those things. So bouncing off a comment that someone sent me, and they had said, apparently there are more ace vegetarians than we thought. I'm one, and I know at least 2 others, but yeah, Ace Vegetarian Club should definitely exist. And I replied like this. I said, yeah, there are. Yes, it should. You know, I find people react to my asexuality the same as they react to my vegetarianism sometimes. Vegetarianism comes up more often because I eat with people I don't know well more often than I talk about sex things with people I don't know well. But asexuality is more commonly reacted to with bullshit in my experience. I get this "you think you're better than me" vibe from them. But meat/sex is good and I like it. But how can you not be fulfilled by eating meat/having sex? So what's your problem with meat/sex? So basically, you like denying yourself the best things in life. Okay, to each her own. Are you sure I can't interest you in some meat/sex? Because I make a really good burger/give some pretty great oral. Occasionally lies to you about trying to feed you meat or trying to get you into bed. You just haven't had good meat/sex. I'm sorry, but anybody would have a hard time resisting this great meat/this great body. I don't see why you can't just try it. So if I eat meat/have sex, is that gonna gross you out? I can't stand vegetarians/asexuals. They think they're so superior. So I guess you just want to be one of the cool kids now, is that it? Oh, so you think you have problems? Try having my dietary restriction or eating plan/my non-heteronormative identity. Even if you're not both asexual and vegetarian, you probably experience a lot of the same assuming you're elitist/assuming you're trying to make a point/assuming it's a phase/assuming you should be treated with pity attitudes. You get misconceptions about your eating habits or your sex habits and what your attitudes must be, and you put up with a lot of bullshit. It's interesting how many parallels there are. And then some jerk reblogged that post of mine and wrote this. But Tumblr has taught me that asexuals can still desire, have, and enjoy sex. So doesn't it stand to reason that vegetarians can still desire, have, and enjoy meat? Is there a vegetarian spectrum? And then they hashtag that, asexuals. So I replied to that person and I said, not really, because the definition of vegetarian is a person who doesn't eat meat. as in vegetarianism is the lack of a certain behavior. But the definition of asexual doesn't happen to be a person who doesn't have sex, as in asexuality is the lack of a certain attraction, not the lack of a certain behavior. You might also take note of the fact that a vegetarian can have a past of eating meat without being invalidated as not a real vegetarian, while asexual people who have had sex in the past but don't currently have sex are still treated like this past might invalidate them somehow, even though having sex isn't what makes someone not asexual. There do, however, happen to be people who call themselves vegetarian who still cheat sometimes, or have meat by accident and still use the word. So there is some wiggle room, I'm sure, and some people who use the word vegetarian are actually pescatarian or don't eat red meat, so in that sense, there is kind of a spectrum, but it's still not comparable because vegetarianism is based on behavior and asexuality is not. But I'd appreciate it if you didn't, asexuals, our community, and imply that we make no sense or have unreasonable definitions. Because even though I showed some interesting parallels between vegetarianism and asexuality, they are not equivalently defined. And it's really gross when people use false equivalency arguments to try to make us look silly. I'm not sure how else to interpret an argument that's tagged #asexuals. I would have possibly understood it as an honest question if you hadn't done that. But I hope whatever honest curiosity you did have was answered by this response. And someone else who is more on my side reblogged this and wrote these hashtags and said, there's only so far you can go with the asexual/vegetarian analogy. Vegetarian is better comparable to celibacy. Becoming a vegetarian was a very conscious decision for me. Actually, the only thing you can do a good analogy with is another sexual orientation. Oh, the irony. So I replied to that person and I said, yes, you are right. Vegetarianism is much more accurately compared to celibacy than to asexuality, and that's completely true. Which is why suggesting asexuality and vegetarianism should have the same logical underpinning was a poor comparison on the part of that previous blogger, who has a history of misrepresenting asexual and demisexual people to try to make them look unreasonable. That said, my post illustrated a comparison of people's reactions to asexuality and vegetarianism, not asexuality and vegetarianism themselves. I think it's interesting how both asexuality, misrepresented as chastity usually, and vegetarianism are frequently interpreted as moral statements meant to shame others. And my post just kind of examined the responses that grow out of that misconception and other related ones. So, that's the end of that. And it was long enough and comprehensive enough that I probably don't need to elaborate anymore. But as usual, just in the comments, I'd be very interested in hearing how anybody else who is either vegetarian or asexual or both has had similar experiences, whether you think it's related to people feeling that they're being judged or feeling that it's a moral statement or a statement of superiority, if you agree with or disagree with anything that I said there. And also just going back to the original question that someone had written, whether you have any other interpretations as to why people tend to have a knee-jerk reaction to asexuality with a negative response, an invalidation, or a statement of disgust. Asexuals, am I right? Thanks for watching.